I'm here today with Victor Pisini, owner of Pisini Shoes in downtown Franklin, a fixture of the downtown for many years. And Mr. Pisini, so you grew up in Franklin?
I was born here. I was born here in 1928. Lived here all my life, thus far. And I've owned and operated this store since roughly 1950. And I'd worked here 9 years prior, learning the trade, and expanded the business to what it is today. Fortunately, I was able to open my store here in Franklin, which I think is an extraordinary community. I think one of the best in the Commonwealth. We have excellent school system, excellent police and fire, good form of government. I think we're very fortunate to have the MBTA.
Definitely, that's a very big asset for the town.
I think Franklin is just, with Dean College here to educate our children as well, I think we're very fortunate here to have such a town.
Definitely. How have you seen Franklin change over the years? Because you've been in the downtown here. Has it always been the same location for Pisini Shoes?
I used to be next to the Rome restaurant. There was an older building there.
Was that the Morris Opera House building, or was that a different building?
Separate building. And I was there until '78, and then moved up here to the present location. Yeah, I've been on the square, as we call it, for 76 years.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And you have a big shoe sort of shop in the back for maintaining and servicing shoes as well, which is fairly unusual these days. You know, now that a lot of people just sell shoes and don't do the sort of cobbler work of maintaining them.
Well, that's what I learned initially, was strictly shoe repairing, and then I developed into the shoe business.
How have you seen sales change over time? Is business still pretty good these days, or has it become harder in the downtown?
Oh, it's become much harder. Us brick and mortar stores are finding it a little difficult because of the major malls hurt us initially.
Big competition.
And then, well, competition in a form, but they never gave service. Fortunately, the little shop still gave service, as we do. Now I find the internet is hurting the small business by
people buying over Amazon and services like that.
Over Google and Amazon. Right. But the town is still a wonderful little town.
Yeah.
And
your children grew up here as well, of course.
My two sons, yep. Very fortunate. They were in a good school system. One of them today is a lawyer, and the other is a doctor. And they both went through our school systems and then went on.
Right.
And I've seen many, many children through the Franklin school system go on to be doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers. So they've all done well through the school system. And I find Franklin a very safe community with the police. We're known as one of the safest communities in the country. And our fire department's excellent. There's nothing more I can say about the town, except I think it's great. I've been very fortunate to have been here all my life.
What are some of the businesses that have changed here in the downtown in the time that you've had Pisini Shoes, both in this location and before 1978 at your old location? Because I understand that a lot of the restaurants and stores and so forth down in the downtown have shifted over the years.
When I was a boy, back, and I started, when I was in the 5th grade, I started a little Liberty magazine business. I began developing a little delivery system with Liberty magazines. Downtown, from Dean College to Simons, there were approximately 100 stores
Wow.
downtown. there were
There's
there were
not that many stores in downtown Worcester or Framingham these days.
We had triple deckers, which housed lawyers, dentists, doctors. And downstairs, many retailers. We had every major department store. We had every major food mart, the A&P, First National, Stop and Shop. We had them all downtown. The Newberries, the Grants. Many people remember, many don't. We had a courthouse, so you used to be able to go in and sit and listen to the proceedings.
That's right. That shifted over to Rentham somewhere along the way.
Yep. We had our own bank, Franklin National Bank, and then we had a reserve unit here. So Franklin's had many, many things.
Right.
Very diverse community.
Was there a particular decade where things changed a lot in the downtown? You know, building big box stores, for instance, over in Bellingham or at the edge of town. Was it sort of the 70s, 80s, and 90s that there was a big shift in the downtown from so many different businesses to a somewhat fewer number of businesses?
No, it was even earlier than that. As the town began to expand and the periphery of houses were in Franklin Center or thereabouts, and people could more or less walk downtown. After the Second World War, as the young men coming home began to build homes a little further out, then shopping centers began to develop because they were getting closer to the population.
Right. And one example of that kind of shopping center is the one that now has Liquor World and Lee's Kitchen and those Franklin House of Pizza and those kind of things. That was built in the mid to late 1950s?
Yes. The first thing I remember, as far as really developing, was John Brunelli, who was in the Navy in the Second World War. And he began in the Navy one of the first self-service grocery stores, where the owner of the grocery store didn't put the goods in the basket. You went around, picked up the groceries, and put them in your basket. And he started Brunelli's Market right at the end of Lewis Street and East Central Street. And then he moved across the street into the developed now, which has Star Market.
Very interesting.
That was one of the first major food marts, and that's when A&P, First National, Stop and Shop, they began widening their stores, making aisles, and putting carriages so you could go up and down the aisles and pick your own groceries.
Wow. It's funny to think of self-service grocery stores as being a big innovation because we sort of take them for granted now. But another thing like that is, I guess, even the convenience for many people of self-service gas. There's still the Malloy's place right down the street that still does full serve, which is a nice convenience for some. But even that's another thing where people used to be accustomed to, I guess, getting all their gas taken care of by an attendant at the gas station, much the same way that they were accustomed to having a grocer load up their cart for them when they go to the store. Very interesting with those kind of shifts. And you mentioned that Brunelli's place, was that over by the old Horace Mann house?
No.
What's now the Star Market?
No,
over
it's
on
right there on the corner of Lewis Street, and I think, is it Keller Williams?
Oh, okay, yep,
Right
I understand.
there at the corner,
Yep.
that's where he began.
Sort of right near what's currently Speedway and the East Central Street CVS and all that stuff over there on Lewis Street.
Right.
And I imagine there was probably other big changes along the way, from the 50s, probably through the 80s and 90s along.
That was all farmland.
Wow.
And we had, I can recall going over to Horace Mann's house when his house was still there, and the Wolford family was living there at the time, and there was a big barn and they had horses.
Wow.
And they developed a track right behind where the housing complex is. And
what's now Glen Meadows?
Glen
that
Meadows,
area?
right. And they eventually tore down Horace Mann's house, and
Was it really dilapidated, or was it really was it just sold
it
for?
had been added onto.
Mm,
It was had gotten quite old. Could it have been resurrected? Like anything, I'm sure it could
Right.
have, but they didn't feel they wanted to spend the money into it. So it was taken down, and a plaque was put up down there. But I feel bad that there was the greatest educator, Horace
right.
Mann, and first public schools and whatnot, and we only have a plaque instead of a real.
I know. It'd be nice to have a house museum.
Would have
wouldn't
been,
it?
yeah. But Franklin's a diverse place. It's
Yes.
the people in it are diverse, many, all nationalities,
Right.
and the beauty of it when we all got here. Of course, I'm first generation, but when my parents came here, immigrants, all they wanted to do was be an American and fit in the American way of life, and we all did. Franklin, I find, is all American. There is no such thing as anything but, that I know of.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to stop for 1 second and check the recording here, make sure it's all still going well. Looks like we're A-okay. Great, so I'm going to continue with the interview. It's just going to leave it rolling here, so I'll give it 1 second. So Victor, you mentioned that your parents were first-generation immigrants. Did they come from Italy?
Oh yes, they came from Naples area. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. I understand a lot of the Italian families in Franklin are sort of from South Italy, both the Adriatic coast and sort of the Naples area. Were there a lot of people from the same towns or same communities, or was it a number of people from different towns that came to
Different
Franklin?
towns, different communities. Yep.
Were there other immigrant groups that were really common at that period in time? I understand Italians were a very big group in the community life in the early 20th century.
Because right around that time, there were Armenians that came in. There were Jewish. There were Greeks. There were French. There were many
Right.
different nationalities all came in the turn of the century. Mm-hmm. My parents got over here, I think, in 1911, and they brought over one child. My mom had one daughter, and expecting her second, which was my brother, who Franklin Pisini Field is named after.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, he also is in the Dean Hall of Fame as an athlete, and that's why they named
For football
the field.
or for baseball or something like that?
Baseball primarily.
Baseball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was an excellent sport.
So I've heard you list 2 or 3 siblings. How many siblings did you have in total?
There were 7 of us in the family.
What about your other siblings?
There were 4 girls, had 4 sisters and I was one of 3 brothers, and they've all passed now.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So was the youngest and the last survivor. Mm-hmm.
And did most of them stay in Franklin and live and work in the community here? Or did some of them
They
head to
all
other towns?
did until they married, and once they married, several of them moved out of state. Mm-hmm.
Whereabouts? To places like Florida or California?
No,
or
they
closer to
moved
home than that?
close, Woonsocket, and that was it. The furthest was Woonsocket. No, my one brother moved to Connecticut.
Well, it's nice and conveniently located
They
close
were.
by.
Yes, they were. Mm-hmm. Yep. It was very, very family. It was a very close family type, and we all tried to stay close to Mom and Dad, but my dad passed very early in life. And my mom lived up to nearly 90, so it was wonderful to have her about. Mm-hmm.
What part of town did you grow up in?
Right down on Lewis Street.
Oh wow! So you got to see that entire neighborhood firsthand, especially up until the Brunelli store went in.
Born and brought up in the same house, and lived there ever since.
What address was that on Lewis Street? Is the building still there?
Oh, yeah.
I imagine most of the houses on Lewis Street are
They're
older
all
houses.
big.
So.
They're all big and
Right.
still there. Mm-hmm. Yep. Most of the old houses in the periphery of downtown are still there. The newer houses are anywhere from a half mile to a mile out in all 4 directions.
Right. Well, I
and
guess it was
beyond.
probably mostly farmland when you were
They were
growing
all
up.
farms. We had many farms in town.
Wow.
Fact is, I usually tell the story that when I was a young boy, a younger man, and I was in my old store, I used to come up to Puritan Drugstore, which is right next door to where I am, which is now Gallagher's Pub, and I was very friendly with the druggist. He thought that maybe someday I would go to pharmacy school, which
Turns out you did other things.
so I did other things. I went on to become an accountant rather than a pharmacist. So this gentleman I got to meet in there, and he used to deliver medical supplies for animals,
Oh wow! So veterinary medicines and stuff.
veterinary medicine. So I got to know him very well. His name was Mr. Goldstein. He and I got to be very friendly, although he was much older than me, because he had children my age. So we began, and when he would come up, he'd always drop down to my store and say hello and how things are going, and we'd chat. And then one day he came in tears, and he says, my oldest son, who was going to become president of my company, got killed in a plane crash.
Wow.
He and another fellow who had a tire company in Franklin they had been exploring a golf course, and the plane crashed. So he had to name his second son as president, as they were going to develop and go from Mark Stevens, which is a small firm in Woonsocket, which is presently CVS. So,
Did they sell to CVS or did they become
he
CVS?
developed CVS. He was CVS. He went from the small Mark Stevens, which I think is still in Woonsocket, to come up with the name CVS and develop the drug business, which is a multi business today.
Right, yeah, tremendously.
And
I think one of the top 10 or 12 largest companies in the U.S. these days.
And his son Sid and I went to Dean together. We were very good friends. And but his initial son Larry was to be president. And I always had a lot of respect for that family. They were great people.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah, most people didn't know that CVS started from the small Mark Stevens.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know that.
Yep.
So you mentioned you actually originally went to school for accounting. How did you find your way into the shoe business?
Well, I've always been in the shoe business, and it's been my love. In fact, when I first took over the store, I bought it out in 1950, got drafted into the Korean War, spent 3 years there, was fortunate enough to get chosen to go to officers candidate school, and then I went over to Korea as a second lieutenant.
Wow.
So
Second Lieutenant, U.S. Army?
yes, and then I came back. But in the interim, when I first took over the store in 1950, I was only 21, 22 years old, and I wrote to Tom McCann and asked, was there any possibility of me opening an independent Tom McCann store? Because I knew they were one of the biggest shoe companies in the world, the country. I got a nice letter back saying, sorry, but they're strictly corporate. Fine. So in the late, maybe in the early 70s or thereabouts, can't recall the exact date, but a gentleman came in my store and asked who I was, and Mr. Pisini. So I have a letter here that said that you would like to possibly take on Tom McCann as an independent. And I said, yes, I would. And he says, we just opened one independent store in California, and we would like to try one here in the Northeast. I went outside, and I told the story, and I looked, and he asked, what's wrong? I says, I'm looking to where the rainbow landed. And he said, and I says, well, to take on Tom McCann, I said, it's gotta be at the end of the rainbow. It's one of the greatest shoes in the country, you know?
Right.
And so I started Tom McCann, and then developed the shoe business from there.
Is Tom McCann still your favorite brand, or?
But unfortunately, it's gone.
Yeah. When did they go out of business, or
Oh, they
disappear
went out
from
of
the market?
business probably over 30 years ago.
Wow.
Mhm.
I was gonna say,
Which-
because I have to confess, I'm not familiar with the brand myself. So.
When Adidas started coming over, I think from Germany, oh, that had to be way back. Tom McCann came out with a shoe called Jocks, but it did not compare as a running shoe,
Mm.
and they immediately went out of business because they realized they were shoe manufacturers and not sneaker makers.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
So these days you stock a number of different brands. You have things like Red Wing shoes and stuff like that. Is that sort of your favorite brand at this point, or are there others that you really like? I suppose they're all good for different things.
Well, I try to carry nothing but quality, and I let the other stores carry
Everything
the
else.
the price shoes.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, it's pretty nice that the shoes you sell, pretty much, except for maybe a few sneakers, which are really difficult to repair, anything leather at least could be brought back in and repaired if
Most of the ones I sell can be repaired. Most of them. There are some still that are molded, and what happens, many of the shoes today, men bring them in and like them to be repaired, but they're molded, and a molding machine probably costs $250,000 to $500,000.
Wow, my goodness.
So, no
That's hard for a
chance
small
of buying
time
one
shoe.
of those. And they're all made for a specific type
Right.
of shoe. Mhm.
So Victor, you mentioned that you served in the Korean War. So you were involved for the entire 3 years of the conflict?
No, but just, we all went over at that time. We were over there for 9 months.
Wow.
All vets.
And would that have been 1952 or 53?
Yeah, I was in from 52 to 53.
52 to 53. Wow.
Well, I was drafted in 51.
Wow.
So it was 3 years, from
Right.
51 to 53.
Did you train stateside and do Officer
Stateside, and
Candidate
then went
School
over
and
to
head over?
Korea. Mhm.
That's got to have been a very interesting experience.
Mhm.
With the Korean War, when you were there, I'm guessing by 52, 53, that's when it had sort of become a stalemate almost between the Chinese and the North Koreans and the
No,
U.S.
it
and
was
the South
not a
Koreans?
stalemate when
Or
I
is it
was
still
there.
very much
Not a
undecided?
stalemate, no. No, we were still fighting.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then it became a stalemate.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was the forgotten war, but over 54,000 young men didn't come back.
Wow.
So all those families have not forgotten it. And
Absolutely.
I feel so bad.
It must be pretty amazing all these years later. It's because obviously at least one of the Koreas is very prosperous, and Korean-built cars, Korean-built televisions are everywhere in the U.S. But when you were there, I understand that South Korea was still a very, very poor country. Actually, both Koreas, to say nothing of being war-torn at the time.
They're very, very poor, both were. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, South Korea, of course, like the Marshall Plan, both in Germany and Japan, we basically aided in rebuilding them
Right. Really
to the
gave them a leg up.
powerhouses they are today. Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
During your time during your deployment in Korea, were you with like an infantry unit or with?
Oh yeah, I was with the 40th Infantry.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And was that what part of the country were you folks in for most of 1952 and 53? Was it sort of the inland area, or more like the areas like Seoul and Busan and those kind of places?
We were in right in the fighting area, if you want to call it that. And then my unit was pulled offline, and just before I got there, they got hit pretty bad and lost many men. And when I got there, within a month, we were pulled offline, and we were sent to the Sangdong tungsten mines, where the MMM mining was digging tungsten to send back to the States.
Very interesting.
Tungsten is a hardening unit for tanks and
Right.
guns and everything.
Good for allies, for armor and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And we were there to protect that. And then soon thereafter, we were moved out of there and sent over to the island of Kojido, which was the prisoner of war camp.
Was that still part of South Korea, or was
All
that part of
South
Japan?
Korea. All South Korea
Wow.
at that time. Yeah.
And then, my understanding from my reading about the Korean War, there was a lot of prisoners of war from the Chinese and North Korean side that were taken into the UN camps.
Mm-hmm. That's
Wow.
where we were. My division was over there, and it was rotating. We would go
Right.
over and rotate, and then we would go to another area.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know for sure because I don't know all of the sequence of events, but it's interesting to think that perhaps even when you were first sort of in the combat area at the very beginning of your deployment there, you may have actually been in what's now North Korea. So, or perhaps not. Maybe it was into South Korea at that point. But
You know, that's a good question. I don't know if the areas we were, because we would go forward and pull back.
probably very hard to tell
Forward
the
and pull
rugged
back.
terrain
So
there.
all of a sudden, in 1953, they set up the 38th parallel.
Right.
And I can remember right after it was set up at the end of the war, my driver was driving me, and we were on our side of the 38th parallel, and a truckload of presumably North Koreans or Chinese were on the other side of the road. And as they went by, of course, knowing we were Americans, they spat at us,
Wow.
and as they went by, and I can remember my driver pulled over to the side, and he said, "If I had a rifle, I'd shoot them all." It was funny, he was just so upset over it.
Right.
Because the war had just ended, and you would think that it would have been a peaceful place.
Right.
And of course, it became peaceful. Thank goodness.
But it certainly didn't quite achieve what the war set out to achieve. I mean, I guess the hope is nowadays with the ongoing peace talks with North Korea and all that stuff that maybe it'll finally be wrapped up. But 60 years late is certainly a very slow turnaround for a conflict like that.
In my opinion, there should be no reason why both North and South Korea can't begin to mingle and both prosper, and families can rejoin with
Right.
families where most of them are past now, but I just feel bad for those people.
Mm-hmm. And I think definitely it's an interesting thing because we honor veterans a few different times throughout the year, and ideally all throughout the year as a community. But I think it's some conflicts that veterans have served in, World War II, for instance, have gotten a lot of attention, as rightly so. But I think Korean War veterans often have sort of been overlooked because the Korean War doesn't fit with the World War II story, and it doesn't really fit with the Vietnam story.
Mm-hmm.
It was, but in some ways, it was almost like the Vietnam story, where it just ground to a halt after all this fighting and bloodshed.
Mm-hmm. And it all could have been done just as soon if the two countries could have got together.
Right, just negotiating instead of fighting.
That's all it was.
But hindsight is always 20/20, right?
Pardon?
I said hindsight is always 20/20,
Always,
right?
always.
And you also got a chance to witness a lot of other very interesting moments in Franklin's history. You grew up here during the Great Depression in the 1930s. What was that experience like in Franklin? How was the community affected by the Great Depression here?
Well, I think most of the things I remember about the Depression is I was only a boy, born in 28, and it was very, as we know, all the way up to the Second World War, there were no jobs, and people were struggling, but everybody was a friend.
Right.
Everybody helped another. I can recall we had a lot of vegetables in my garden because we had a big lot, and we would share them with neighbors who we would probably grow potatoes and beans, etc., and they would grow carrots and so forth. So during the year we'd exchange, so we would have a variety of food. Supermarkets were unheard of, Money was unheard of. So everything had to come from the garden. And we all had chickens and rabbits, and we had 2 pigs. And we would share the lard and some of the pigs with our neighbors, and they would share some of their products with us. And here we are today. We all survived it.
Right.
And I think it was probably one of the best times because everybody was friendly. If a person was sick, they never went hungry. Everybody would bring the soup and whatnot. Everybody would go over and spend time with them if they didn't have someone to spend time with them. We had nothing, but I feel we had everything.
And you would have been in high school during World War II here in Franklin.
Yep.
So you had a chance to witness a lot of the blackouts here at night and things like that.
I was what they called a messenger at the time, a young boy, and I would go around, and if I could see light coming through a window, I would tap the door and tell them, your blind isn't tight, and so forth. And I'd get cursed rather than thanked. But anyway, and we had people driving in the dark, up and down, checking. We never knew. Communications was days away. It was never as instant as today. So we didn't know if things could have happened to us right here during the Second World War or not.
Growing up, did your family or some of your neighbors have radios or lots of programs that you would tune into, or was that more of a later thing whenever you shifted over to TV?
You know, we had a radio. Communication was real bad. If you could understand it and hear it between the blurting and all, it was great. But no, it was very limited, and it was because a lot of it was almost hearsay, or you'd go to the movie theater, and they'd have the news, and that would bring you an update of what was happening in the war.
And that would have been the Morse Opera House at that point? That had the movie theater? Which is now where the Darani Grill is, the Indian restaurant at the corner of Cottage Street and...
no, it was down further.
Oh, down further?
The vacant piece.
Oh, the part that used to be the Zoetrope.
Street.
That was subsequently turned into the Zoetrope?
Yep.
Very interesting.
That's sorely missed. I mean...
Yes, I remember that from the mid-2000s, right before it closed down. It was a fixture of my childhood as well. And so when you went to high school, you must have attended the 1924 high school over at the corner of Union Street and West Central Street. Davis there nowadays. And
in my class, I think there were 76, and I hear nearly 500 just graduated.
Yes.
So
that
the town has grown.
It gives you a sense of how much the town has grown over the years.
From, I remember it, somewhere in the 4,000, now to somewhat between 34 and 36,000.
And obviously a lot changed after the war as well. Televisions, you mentioned the Brunelli store, but also all the other stores that opened sort of on the outskirts of downtown and along both ends of 140 heading toward Rentham, heading toward Bellingham. And then there was also the construction of Interstate 495 in the 1960s, which is a big change for the town. When did people start commuting in large numbers to Boston?
I would say, because we had no rail system, and about the only rail system we had was the New York, New Haven, and Hartford, but only came into town on rare occasions. It was not a commute.
Very interesting.
So you couldn't bank on going to Boston and come home on
a
train,
regular schedule.
on a regular schedule.
Yeah.
I would say that once 495 opened, it seemed as though people began to travel further and further on 495.
I'm guessing before that, a lot of the big employers in town were things like Garlic Farms, the big dairy plant, or Clark Cutler McDermott. Were there other big companies in town?
The American Felt, who made felt for almost the whole felt industry.
Wow. And where was their location?
Right down where, oh dear, I can't recall the name of the, something stone? down on West Central, on the left-hand side, you go down.
Yep.
I can't recall what it's called.
It's going to come to us in a second.
But it's a huge complex, and they've developed it into retail, a great big retail area.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the other big companies in town that people
Well,
had jobs at before, during, and after the war?
There was a Buckley and Mann right over in Norfolk. They made jackets and so forth.
And I believe that's the site that's got some sort of pollution right now. There's a big controversy over on Mill Street because
Could be.
the folks over some construction company over in Norfolk's going to start quarrying out a lot of the soil there and chipping it off to go make it into concrete or something like that. But it's going to mean a lot of dump truck trips up and down Mill Street, like dozens a day in some cases. So I understand a lot of the residents right now are concerned about that over in that side of town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been great development, in town. But it's taken away all of the farms and all the open land.
Right.
Thank goodness for Mr. Delcott that gave town.
Right.
Gave
Fortunately, we've had
Franklin
some folks that have donated those kind of
that
open
type of
land.
thing. And of course, I believe Mr. Gorelick, when he donated to the was the Sister St. Mary up there. I believe he donated big set land, so there was no development going up there. So we've retained a little bit in Franklin. Mm-hmm.
Right. Did you know the Parmenters and some of those
I
other
knew
prominent
very
farm
well.
families from growing
Very
up?
nice family. Yep. I remember the old Parmenter red chicken.
Right, and they used to ship that out of the Railway Express agency
yeah.
station, which is now the Franklin Agway that Melanie Hamblin owns down on Cottage Street.
Mm-hmm.
And when did they sell their chicken business? Was that in the 1960s or earlier than
I
that?
honestly don't remember. Mm-hmm.
What were some of the other big farm families in the area? I understand there was folks that did dairying and chickens and probably other stuff as well.
Yeah, there were many. The Pelisian family had chickens. The Mr. Gorelick had a pig farm down on Lincoln Street.
And that's what's now Dacey Field, right?
Mhm.
Or was that the Dacey
Exactly.
piggery or the Garelick piggery?
I think the Gorelick.
Garelick, interesting.
Uh,
I've always heard stories about the piggery up there being pretty smelly on a warm summer day.
and of course, where the new school, what school is it down there now? I can't remember.
The Annie Sullivan.
The one on
School?
Lincoln Street.
Yes.
I can remember when they were afraid to dig up that area because some of the mafia used to meet there.
Really. And
on some Sundays.
do some illegal business.
That was funny.
Very interesting. What are some of the other places that have changed a lot? I'll give you a few examples of relatively recently built, last 30 years kind of things. Like, for instance, the big Village Plaza with Stop and Shop, Marshalls, things like that. What was there before that?
If I'm not mistaken, that was there were a couple of things now. I can't recall if both of them were sold at the same time or thereabouts. One of them was a big Franklin fence, and then the other adjoining area, if I'm not mistaken, was a restaurant. And that was sold, I think, somewhat combined, and then that developed. But to be honest with you, I was too busy up here
Right.
to worry about what was happening down there. So,
I'm guessing maybe the same situation, but with East Central Street, the area, for instance, where the Newtown building is, the 3-story office building
was
there,
all
and Big
farmland.
Y and all that stuff, that was all farmland?
all family.
And that was up until what, like the late 70s or early 80s? Was that farmland, or were there some businesses there, like car dealerships, for a while?
No, the only business that was down there was Wellick's, and that was a little ice cream store because they
Sounds
had.
fun.
And but that was all farmland. There are very few buildings, and the same going down West Central Street. From the cemetery down, there was Clark Cutler's, And then on the opposite side, it was all, there was the Van Leeuwens had a nursery, and then it was all farmland. It was all just open land.
Wow. I've seen a few images of Franklin from as recently as 1975, 1977 along 140, and it's exactly like you described, just farm fields, which is so hard to imagine, you know. And Franklin looks much more like it could be Vermont or Kansas practically than what we recognize today.
When you would get off of East Central or West Central, and you go down through these streets, it was nothing to see cows or goats or horses or something in almost every pasture.
And some places stayed that way until very recently. Like I understand, as recently as maybe 1991 or 1992, the area that is now the Charles River Drive Estates over on Oak Street, the big kind of newer development there, which I guess is already 25 years old. That was all a big farm field till pretty recently when they switched over to houses. Wow.
Yep. They just developed them all. They just, you know, people needed houses. You know, the population was growing after the Second World War, the boom. Young men coming home from the Second World War, having families.
And I imagine there must have been sort of a housing shortage in some ways, because I'm guessing with so many people, you know, almost in poverty or out of work during the Great Depression, there probably wasn't that much building of new houses for growing families. So I imagine that was a big factor in the construction of neighborhoods like the Southgate, you know, kind of ranch houses and things like that.
Yep, many of them developed shortly after the Second World War ended.
Do you still live in the downtown these days, or do you live more on the outskirts of town?
I live still in the same house I was born in.
Wow.
Right down there on Lewis Street.
Well, that answers my question from earlier about whether it's still standing.
Oh,
It
yeah.
definitely is still standing.
Still standing. It's been a very, as a retailer, let me put it this way. As a townsman, I say the center is beautiful. As a retailer, I feel bad they went back to two-way, because now only 50% of the people see my store.
That's true. Have you seen a big decline in
I've
business
seen
since
some decline, because they just don't know I'm here. Those that go on 140 don't know there's a shoe
Right.
store.
And it was originally two-way for a while until the 70s or early 80s, and then they made it
way back,
one-way.
Way back, yeah.
And then they made it the one-way route from the, I'm guessing, like late 70s or early 80s until, what was it, 2016 when they made it two-way again?
Two-way again. It's just about 40 years one way.
I've been interested actually to see. I remember when it became two-way again, summer 2016, so a couple of years ago. I was initially pretty concerned that a lot of people who were used to the one-way would start driving the wrong way and potentially end up in some accidents. I've only so far seen one person drive the wrong way, and that was late at night. So fortunately, I don't know if there's been any catastrophic
No, I don't
mistakes,
think so.
but
No, I think people
adapted to it. It seems like.
I think people adjusted to it initially, complained because they didn't know exactly how to get downtown without having to go a distance to turn around and come back. But once they realized which left and which right brought them to the center, now it's commonplace.
I guess one of the good things about the recent redo of the downtown is at least customers no longer have to pay the meters, because there aren't meters anymore.
True.
I got rid of those 2 or 3 years ago, I guess.
That was pretty helpful to downtown too. And funny as it may seem, it doesn't seem like people are abusing the 2-hour parking time. I seldomly see a car parked for 2 hours in the same place.
I guess because I know they're going to get ticketed.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there were, but I mean, I think many people got ticketed with the meters because they were hoping to only be in the store for 5 minutes, but that's when the meter maid came by.
Right, of course.
You know, they weren't there for more than 5 minutes, but they got ticketed, and that was funny.
Victor, I understand you have a pretty big stake in the downtown. So do you own the whole building that your shoe store is in, or just part of it?
No, I own this building right here.
And I guess maybe properly in current terms we'd call it the Pisini block, keeping with the old tradition of calling different blocks of buildings after the folks that own them. Is there a name for this particular building? Like
Yes,
an
I
older owner or something
I
that?
think there's a plaque up, which when they did over the front of my store, back here about 15 years ago, I wanted the original plaque put back up, and it's the Morse building.
Mm. What are some of the other businesses that you've had in here throughout the years during the time you've owned it?
Oh, there's been various businesses.
And have you had it since 1978 when you came over here, or did
No,
you
I had it
own
a
it
bit
before that?
I
That's
moved
great.
up here in '78.
Mm.
Yep. Aubuchon's used to be in the block.
No kidding.
Yep.
I always remember it from over near Cottage Street, just off of Union Street, and now obviously it's a new location by Shaw's
Well, they
over on
moved
East
from
Central.
here down to Cottage
Certainly a
Street.
bigger location over there.
Oh,
It'd be
yeah.
hard to fit more than a little neighborhood hardware store in a
Oh,
storefront in the downtown.
They did very well, and it was good for downtown.
I bet it must have brought a lot of traffic
It
down
did,
here.
it did.
People needing screws or nails or paint or any of that. Definitely brings a lot of traffic in.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see the future of Franklin being, looking ahead to the years and decades in front of us?
You know, I think we've almost reached a point where I don't know where they can get much more development.
That's my thought too. It seems like
Because-
there's not too many lots left. Probably a few that are hiding tucked
Well-
away on some side street, but
But what I'm saying is not so much just house lots, they're probably always going to be available. But developments, larger structures, there just doesn't seem to be, and if they did, would they get water, sewer, electricity to those outlying areas?
right. I know that's been a big question in a lot of recent debates, like some of the discussion of putting higher density developments down Summer Street, for instance, which was a big topic that a lot of people talked about, I believe sort of late 2016, early 2017.
Well, look at the big development there's down there on East Central Street where the old country club area was. I mean, that,
That's Cook Farm Village, I believe.
yeah, I mean, from, you would have assumed a couple of houses to about 40 or 50, you know, so it puts a big strain on water
Definitely.
and the services of the town.
That's another place, I guess, actually, that was that where Cook's Farm Village is now. I've always been unclear because I'm actually trying to remember from growing up in town whether that was that part of the country club or was that Ralph Cook's farm? Because there is a separate development that's Cook's Farm, some other thing.
Okay, there were two developments there. I think Cook's Farm was as you go past the country club and go right, in there, there's a whole development.
And that used to be sort of a nursery or something like that?
Yeah,
or
they had
kind of like
trees.
Stobart's
Yeah,
and
all
that
the
kind of
kids
thing.
went down there in the summer and they'd help, or in the spring, fall rather, and they'd pick apples and do some farming. And then just back here 4 or 5 years ago became the development of the old driving range area of the country club. which
That's
now
right, I
has
remember
all
that.
the homes.
Yes, that's right. I remember the big nets there, and probably a few particularly good putters putting golf balls over onto the road every now and again.
Into East Central Street, I know it. Yeah, it's been tremendous development in Franklin.
Definitely, even in my lifetime, but especially over the span of time that you've lived here in Franklin, I'm sure it's a dramatic change.
You know, it's the old, if it's, just not allowed to, and if it's contained and monitored, I think it's wonderful, as it has been. They've been trying to maintain it, monitor it, make sure there's sufficient water and
Basically
services.
making sure there's a good plan going
Yep.
forward.
Yep, as long as they do that, Franklin will be all right, but if, they've gotta be careful that it just doesn't explode and then we can't handle it.
I do wonder, 50 years from now, how urban Franklin will be. In some ways, we already have all the houses in the neighborhoods built, so those will probably remain for a long time. But, with the property prices so expensive in Boston and more people looking for any way to get outside the city to anything remotely cheaper, I do wonder if over time some houses will be demolished or lots consolidated to more sort of apartment and condominium style buildings that are
That
kind of
could
being
happen.
built now.
Mhm.
I guess time will tell.
I was in I happened to, fortunate enough to go for a few days with my two sons to Florida this year, and we were down there, and first time I'd been to Florida.
What part of Florida did you go to? Tampa Bay area or Orlando or something like that, or there's a lot of places in Florida, so if you don't remember.
The Red Sox.
Oh, Fort Myers.
Fort Myers.
There we go.
Fort Myers.
I know. Like I said, there's a lot of places.
That old area, there is nothing. I mean, I think I expected to see little communities like Franklin. There wasn't one. Everything is on a strip mall of a nature.
Right.
And they're all developing nothing but either condos or strip malls.
I actually was in Fort Myers passing through there in February, and it's exactly like you say. It's
Right
it's
after the
very
big storm.
different than up here. No downtowns for sure.
No, I was disappointed in that. I was expecting to walk into little stores
Right.
like we have downtown and chat. There wasn't one. You know?
Your kind of great small business would be, unfortunately, an oddity in Florida or California, one of those places. People wouldn't know what to make of it, I suspect.
It's very interesting. Yeah, it's been a great run, you know. I have no complaints. I feel that in my lifetime I think I've done everything I've ever wanted to do, accomplished everything I've wanted to accomplish.
And you've accomplished a lot.
And I just feel very fortunate in all respects, you know, because of my health and my business. This is what they call a cutter, and what it does is it has a blade, and it'll cut through your plastic, rubber, or leather, and in which those products today are very difficult to cut with just a hand knife. So they developed this many, many years ago when the old Usguide came out, the Usguide rubber, which was a very, very hard rubber, and shoe repairers were finding it difficult to cut with a hand knife. So they came up with this, and they call it a 5-in-1, and what it does, it has 5 different operations that are pertinent to the shoe repair industry. Of course, this is the last, is what we pound on, and the advantage to this, if we drive a nail into a shoe and it hits the metal, it peens and it doesn't come up onto your foot. There are times we've missed the iron and people have complained. These are nailers. These nail on the shoes today. We don't have to nail them on by hand with it.
I'm sure that's a big time saver.
This does various things. It drives the length of the nail you want into the heel, cuts it, and countersinks it. And this prevents it from, this peens the metal if it goes too deep, so it doesn't puncture your foot. This is the man's. This is the ladies. It's the pressure is the difference, because this is for high heel shoes, and the height of them with the shaft are not that strong, and you have to be careful with the pressure. It could snap or bend.
So that's a little bit, the
Less
women's
pressure.
shoes ones, a little bit less pressure than the men's shoes.
Yep. Of course, this is called a finishing machine. This does all the operations from trimming the coarseness of what you do off the last. And as you work down, you are now, if you want to call it, beautifying the shoe. You are trimming smooth, then you're sanding the heels from the coarseness of the cuts by hand, and you smooth them. Each one is from coarse to smooth.
Oh yeah, you can actually see the
And then this one is the
gradation there.
smoothest.
and that's for sort of the final polishing of the leather.
No, that is the final sanding. And then you have an ink process, and the inking has a wax in it, and it's a dye type ink. And what you do is you apply it onto the area that has been sanded, and that penetrates the leather or whatever. And once that dries, you hit them with the brush, the burnisher, which gives them the nice sheen, so when you look at a shoe...
These have a beautiful sheen to them right
Yeah,
here.
well, it does this job, which I don't have a shoe... Yeah, here's one here. You know, it gives it the sheen
Oh, yeah.
around the heel and the sole. And so this finishes it off. So when you get it back, you have a nicely colored, shined shoe. This is the major sewing machine, which sews through leather up to a half-inch thick. Many of your men's work shoes and dress shoes.
Some of those Red Wing boots, if they ever need to be serviced and that kind of thing.
Yep, are stitched on this. That is a McKay machine that does shoes. This stitches the outside. This, your shoe goes inside. This one goes like this. This one goes like that.
I see.
Yep. So this one stitches around here, and this one stitches around here.
Wow. Great explanation.
That is what they call a Singer sewing machine.
Wow, it's in very nice shape.
They call that a 29-4. That was built in 1929. That sews all of the shoes, any part of the shoe that we can get on that machine. That behind there is a splitter, which is unimportant.
Oh, yeah, this right here?
Yeah, that's a splitter. We can take a thick piece of leather and thin it to any degree we want.
And Victor, in addition to your work with shoes, you also do quite a bit of painting. And did I see some of this is also pastel?
These three are pastel right now. Many of them are oil and some watercolor.
And you also have some great artwork over here as well.
Mm-hmm. And these are also some watercolor, some oils, pastels. Mm-hmm.
That's great. How long have you been painting for?
Oh, I've always liked it. I've just got more serious. Actually got more serious when I got back from Korea. I just needed something to settle me down a bit, so I began painting again, and just kept going.
It seems like you do a range of subjects. You do humans, you do landscapes, you do animals, you do all sorts of things. Flowers, like the one over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Beautiful
I have no
pieces.
preference. I just enjoy painting.